Welcome back to Beyond the Darkness. Tonight, we're diving into the heart of Kentucky in the Appalachian Mountains, where the fog rolls in heavy and the woods hide things that should never be seen. Get ready for 4 true creepy encounters from Kentucky, stories that will leave you questioning what lurks in the shadows. So, let's get started. It was early autumn when my friends and I decided to hike in Red River Gorge, deep in the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky. The air was crisp, the trees just beginning to turn shades of orange and yellow. The idea of spending a weekend surrounded by nature sounded perfect. What we didn't know was that the forest had its own plans for us. We arrived in the late afternoon, the sun low in the sky, casting long shadows across the trail. The air had a certain stillness to it, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As we set off down the path, we joked and laughed, our voices echoing off the trees. It felt like the perfect escape from our busy lives, a break from everything that seemed so far away. The further we ventured, the quieter the woods became. The trail narrowed, and the trees grew thicker, their twisted branches hanging low above us, casting strange shadows on the ground. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the soft crunch of leaves beneath our boots. "Does it feel weird to anyone else?" Sarah asked, slowing down. She was always the observant one, the first to notice things. I looked around and couldn't put my finger on it, but something did feel off. The path grew steeper, and the air turned colder as the sun dipped lower. A dense fog began to creep in from the valley, wrapping itself around the trees like a ghostly shroud. We stopped at a small clearing to catch our breath, the mist swirling around our feet. The trees loomed higher in the fog, their silhouettes sharp against the dimming light. "Let's keep going," I suggested, eager to shake the feeling of unease that was creeping up on me. But no one moved. Everyone was looking at something, at the same thing. At the edge of the clearing stood a figure, barely visible in the mist. It was tall, almost too tall, and its body was cloaked in shadow. I could make out the faintest movement, like it was slowly swaying in place. "Who's there?" Jake called out, his voice cracking through the stillness. But there was no response. The figure stood motionless, just on the edge of the fog. The atmosphere thickened, a cold chill settling over us. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes wide. "It's just the fog playing tricks," she said, but her voice wavered, betraying her own uncertainty. "Let's go back," I said, my voice more urgent than I meant it to be. "Now." But as we turned to leave, the figure was gone, vanished without a trace, like smoke fading in the air. We walked on, but none of us spoke. The path seemed longer now, and the trees were closing in, their branches stretching outward like twisted hands. The fog thickened, wrapping itself around us, making it harder to see. It wasn't long before the eerie feeling returned, like we were being watched. Every sound, no matter how small, seemed amplified in the silence. The whispers started then. At first it was faint, like the wind passing through the trees, but soon the whispers became clearer. So clear, in fact, that I thought I could hear my name being called. I turned to look at Sarah, but she didn't seem to hear it. "Did you hear that?" she asked suddenly, her face pale. "Hear what?" Jake said, his voice sounding distant. "That whisper. She started, but then it came again. My name, clear as day. "Sarah." The voice was soft but unmistakable, coming from somewhere in the mist behind us. We all stopped dead in our tracks. I didn't want to turn around, but I did. My heart raced as I scanned the trees, the fog swirling around them like it was alive. But there was nothing there. "It's nothing," I said, trying to steady my breath. "We're just hearing things." But the whisper came again. This time it was closer. And this time, it wasn't just Sarah's name. It was mine. "Jonah." I spun around, my eyes scanning the fog, but there was nothing. Nothing but the twisted trees and the fog that seemed to press in on us, suffocating, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "Let's go back," I insisted, my voice sharp now. We turned and started walking faster, but the whispering continued to follow us, growing louder and more insistent. The path ahead seemed to stretch on forever, the trees too close, the fog too thick. It felt like the forest was changing, like it was alive and closing in on us. When we finally reached the edge of the forest, the fog began to lift, and the whispering stopped. The trail was back to normal, the trees standing still in the daylight. But the unease didn't go away. It clung to us, the feeling that something was still watching, waiting. We didn't speak about it, not then. We just hurried back to the car, the normal world seeming so distant after what we'd just experienced. But when we reached the parking lot, Sarah stopped, her eyes wide. She turned to us, her voice trembling. "Look," she said, pointing to her arm. Her skin was scratched in deep lines, 3 jagged marks that hadn't been there before. We all stared, but no one spoke. The scratches were raw, dark against her pale skin. The woods were quiet again, but I knew something was out there. Something that had followed us out. The drive back to town felt endless. The tension in the car was palpable, none of us speaking as the engine hummed monotonously, cutting through the heavy silence. The air felt thick, as though the fog from the forest had somehow followed us, clinging to the edges of our minds. Sarah was the first to speak, breaking the quiet. "It's probably just nerves," she said, trying to convince herself. "We were out there for hours in the dark. It's easy to start imagining things." But even as she said it, I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She was trying to convince herself more than anyone else. Jake glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed. "You saw it too," he said, his voice low. "That thing standing in the fog, and the whispers. That wasn't just the wind." None of us wanted to admit it, but deep down, we all felt it. The unease, the creeping sensation that we had crossed a line, that the forest had left its mark on us. The next day, I decided to return to the forest. I couldn't explain why, but something about that place, those whispers, the feeling of being watched, had lodged itself in my mind. It was as if the woods were calling me back, and I needed to know what had really happened. I didn't tell Sarah or Jake, not wanting to drag them back into the mess we'd barely escaped from. I drove back to the trailhead by myself, hoping that the daylight would bring some sense of normalcy, that perhaps I could rationalize what had happened. When I arrived, the woods looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. The fog was gone, replaced by a clear sky and the quiet chirping of birds. The trees stood still, their bark covered in soft moss, and the sunlight filtered through the branches, casting dappled shadows on the ground. But I knew something was different. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, a weight I couldn't shake. I stood at the trailhead for a long moment, considering turning back. But then I remembered Sarah's voice, the way she had said, "It's just the fog playing tricks." The doubt crept in, and for a split second, I thought that maybe we had overreacted. Maybe there was an explanation for everything. I had to find it, or I'd never be able to put the experience behind me. I followed the same path we had walked the day before. The trees were just as they had been, the ground damp with dew. I could hear my footsteps on the earth, the sound oddly loud in the quiet woods. But as I continued down the trail, the feeling of being watched returned. The hairs on my neck prickled, and I started to feel the weight of the silence around me. I reached the clearing where we had first encountered the figure. The spot was exactly as I remembered, empty, peaceful, but with an air of something hidden just beneath the surface. I stood there for a moment, waiting for something to happen, as if expecting the woods to reveal their secrets to me. But nothing came. Then, I heard it again. The whisper, faint, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder as it reached me. My name, Jonah. I froze. My blood ran cold. I turned around, half expecting to see Sarah or Jake standing behind me playing a prank, but the clearing was empty. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their shadows stretching long across the ground. There was no one there. The whisper came again, this time louder. "Jonah, come closer." It was no longer the soft, distant call it had been before. It was clear, it was direct, and it was coming from deep within the trees, beyond the clearing. A shiver ran down my spine, and I instinctively stepped back. But my feet wouldn't obey. It was as if the forest was pulling me forward, urging me to step into the unknown. I took a hesitant step toward the woods, drawn in by the voice, even though every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave. Another step, then another. Each one felt heavier than the last, as though the earth itself was holding me in place. And then, in the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, just at the edge of the trees, its form barely visible in the shadows. It wasn't like the shadowy figure we had seen before. This one was different, more solid, more real, yet still impossible to make out clearly. It stood motionless, just at the edge of the forest, watching me. The figure didn't move. It didn't speak, but the air around it seemed to shimmer, like the heat rising off pavement in the summer. I knew it wasn't a person, but I couldn't bring myself to look away. My body froze, caught between the overwhelming need to run and the strange compulsion to get closer. The whispers grew louder, this time not just calling my name but beckoning me forward. "Come closer. Come see." I couldn't resist anymore. The pull was too strong. My feet carried me forward, one step after another, toward the figure in the trees. But the closer I got, the more the air seemed to change. The temperature dropped, and the shadows grew darker, swirling around me like thick smoke. The figure in the trees faded, becoming less defined, until it was just a faint outline in the fog, barely visible, and then it was gone. I stopped, breathless and terrified. The mist returned, thicker than before, swallowing everything around me. The trees seemed to loom taller, their branches bending closer, the forest closing in. The whispering grew silent, leaving only the echo of my own heartbeat in the cold air. I looked around, panic rising in my chest. The trail had disappeared. The way back had vanished. I was lost, trapped in a forest that no longer felt like the one I had entered. The whispers began again, but this time, they were not calling my name. They were speaking in a language I couldn't understand, a strange, guttural sound that twisted in the air like the wind through the trees. I turned in every direction, trying to find the path, but the woods were disorienting. The trees seemed to stretch infinitely, their trunks twisting and bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I wasn't sure how long I had been walking, lost in the fog, when I finally heard it. A soft, steady creaking, like the sound of wood groaning under pressure. Slowly, I turned around, and there, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the figure once more. The figure stood still at the edge of the clearing, its form now clearer but still distorted in the mist. It wasn't quite human, yet it wasn't entirely something else either. Its outline was vaguely humanoid, but the proportions were wrong, almost too long and thin. The fog clung to it, making its shape shimmer and fade like a mirage. I couldn't move. The fog seemed to press in on me from every side, its weight suffocating. The air felt wrong, too thick, like it was full of something I couldn't see but could feel. The figure's presence was overwhelming, drawing me in as if it were pulling me toward it with invisible threads. The whispers began again, not soft like before, but louder, clearer, more insistent. They came from the figure, its mouth opening slowly, releasing words I couldn't understand, their tone rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed to carry weight beyond mere sound. The words had an urgency, a desperate edge to them. "Jonah, come closer." The figure's voice rasped, its words distorted and distorted by the mist. It wasn't just calling me anymore. It was demanding something from me. I tried to step back, but my feet felt rooted to the ground, frozen by some unseen force. My breath quickened as I realized there was nowhere to go. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. It was as if the forest itself had ensnared me, trapping me in a web of fog and shadows. "Please, don't come closer," I whispered to myself, though I wasn't sure whether I was speaking to the figure or to my own terrified mind. But the words seemed to have no effect. The figure stepped forward. It didn't move like a person. It glided, as if its legs didn't touch the ground at all. The mist around it thickened, swirling as if it were alive, wrapping itself around its body like a cloak. It was almost beautiful, but the beauty was dark, unnatural. The figure's movements were slow, deliberate, each step bringing it closer to me. I felt the cold seep into my bones, and for a moment, I wanted to scream, to run, to fight back against whatever was happening. But the words wouldn't come. It was as if the forest had stolen my voice, stolen my will to resist. The whispers grew louder, filling my head, drowning out my thoughts. I finally managed to take a step back, then another. The fog seemed to shift with me, moving as though it were alive, adapting to my every movement. The figure halted in its tracks, its hollow eyes staring straight through me, and then a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing. The fog parted for a moment, and for the briefest instant, I could see the full shape of the figure, now standing just a few feet from me. Its face was pale and featureless, just a smooth, empty surface that seemed to reflect the mist in a strange way. There were no eyes, no mouth, just an empty void where a face should have been. The wind howled, and the mist surged forward again, enveloping me completely. I could feel the figure's presence, still so close, as if it were standing right behind me, breathing down my neck. The whispers continued, now louder, now desperate, as though the thing wanted something from me, something I couldn't give. Suddenly, there was a sharp, loud crack, like thunder, but closer. The figure recoiled, its form flickering, distorting for just a moment, as if something unseen had struck it. The whispers faltered, and for a moment, the air was still. I didn't waste any time. The fog had begun to dissipate, the figure's presence weakening. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I turned and bolted, my feet carrying me through the thick fog, stumbling through the trees and over uneven ground. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't dare stop. Behind me, the whispers seemed to follow, but they were fading. The figure was gone, but the feeling of its presence lingered, an imprint on the air, a shadow that followed me through the trees. The path seemed to reappear, the trees parting to reveal a clearer way forward. I didn't look back. As I neared the edge of the forest, I slowed, breathing heavily, my legs burning from the effort. I reached the trailhead, and for a moment, I thought I had escaped. The air felt different now, lighter, though the weight of the experience hung heavy in my chest. I turned, my eyes scanning the woods one last time, and then I saw it. At the very edge of the trees, just beyond the clearing, the figure stood once more. Its face still a blank, smooth surface, its form faint and shifting. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze, cold, penetrating, watching me, waiting. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew it was aware of me. And even though the figure was far away, I felt the same chill that had seized me in the woods, the same fear that had paralyzed me. It hadn't followed me. It had never left. I turned quickly, running toward my car, the sound of my breath loud in my ears. I didn't stop until I was safely inside, the door locked, the engine running. The forest was silent now, but the image of the figure, its empty face watching me, stayed with me long after I left. And I knew, deep down, that the whispering woods of Red River Gorge had never let me go. Whatever I had seen, whatever had followed me was still out there, watching, waiting. It was late at night when I found myself driving through the Appalachian backroads of Kentucky. I'd been on the road for hours, far from the familiar streets of town, and the fog rolling in from the valley made it feel like I was the only soul alive in the entire world. I've always been someone who loves solitude, especially in places as beautiful as the Appalachian Mountains. But tonight, something felt different. The silence of the road was almost suffocating, and the mist swirling around my headlights seemed to block out everything else. The road wound through dense woods, the trees casting long, twisted shadows in the moonlight. The path ahead was narrow, barely wide enough for one car, and the fog grew thicker with each mile. The car's headlights barely pierced the gloom, and the few houses I passed were dark, silent. The only sound was the steady hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind outside. As I rounded a sharp bend in the road, I saw her. A figure standing by the side of the road, just outside the range of my headlights. At first, I thought it might have been a trick of the fog, but when I got closer, I saw her clearly. A woman dressed in an old-fashioned white gown, her hair hidden beneath a large, wide-brimmed hat. She stood there motionless, facing the road, as if waiting for something. My heart skipped a beat. It was the middle of the night, and there was no one else around for miles. The nearest town was still a good 20 minutes away, and I couldn't help but wonder what a woman was doing out here, alone in the dark, especially dressed like that. Her clothes looked old, outdated, almost like something from another time. I slowed the car as I neared her, instinctively pulling over to the side of the road. I rolled the window down, the cool night air rushing in, and called out to her, unsure of what I was hoping for. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" The woman didn't move. She remained still. Her body turned slightly toward me, but her face still obscured by the hat. I called out again, louder this time, but still she didn't respond. My pulse quickened, and an unsettling feeling crept up my spine. I had no idea what I was dealing with, whether it was someone in need of help or something more sinister. I hesitated, but then I decided to stop and offer assistance. I put the car in park and stepped out, the night air sharp against my skin. "Are you lost? Is there someone I can call for you?" I asked, moving closer to her. The fog swirled around me, making the world feel even more distant and unfamiliar. As I approached, the woman slowly turned her head. Her face remained hidden beneath the shadow of her hat, but there was something strange in the way she moved. Her movements were slow and deliberate, almost too smooth. It was like she was gliding rather than walking. As she shifted, I noticed something. There were no footprints in the dirt around her. No signs that she had been standing there for any length of time. Just the cold air and the ever-thickening fog. I took another step closer, my nerves on edge. The closer I got, the more I could feel the chill in the air, a coldness that seemed to seep into my bones. The woman didn't speak, but I could hear the faintest sound, like a soft whispering, almost like the wind itself was carrying words. Something in my gut told me to turn back, to get into the car and drive away as fast as I could. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, caught in her stillness, in the unsettling aura she exuded. Then, as if she finally noticed me, she raised her head slightly, just enough to reveal her face. My blood ran cold. Her face was pale, too pale, almost ghostly, and there was something wrong with her eyes. They were wide, unnaturally large, and her pupils were black as night. There was no warmth in her gaze, no life, just an empty stare, as if she were staring right through me. A surge of fear hit me like a tidal wave, and I took a step back, my feet stumbling over the uneven ground. I had to get out of there. Something was horribly wrong. I turned quickly, my heart pounding in my chest, and ran back to the car. I didn't look back as I scrambled inside, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror. I could see her now, standing in the same spot, unmoving, watching me. I put the car in drive and sped off, the headlights cutting through the fog. But no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, in the dark, watching from the edge of the road. As I turned the corner, trying to put distance between myself and the road I'd just left behind, I saw her again, this time in my rearview mirror. She was standing at the edge of the road, her face turned toward me, her eyes unblinking, her silhouette now fading into the thickening fog. I slammed my foot on the gas, but it felt like the entire world had slowed down. The fog seemed to grow thicker, and I could barely make out the road in front of me. The chill from the woman's gaze still lingered in my bones, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, even though I hadn't seen her in the mirror for several minutes. Finally, the fog lifted as I approached the outskirts of the town. The familiar lights of the gas stations and small shops reassured me, and I slowed down, my heart still racing. I thought I was safe, but when I glanced at my rearview mirror one last time, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Her figure was standing by the side of the road again, just ahead, up on the hill near the cemetery, watching me from the dark. My heart raced as I sped down the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The thought of what I'd seen, the woman standing by the side of the road, her eerie gaze following me, was enough to make my skin crawl. I glanced at my rearview mirror once more, half expecting to see her still standing there. But the road behind me was empty. There was no sign of her. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm myself, but the unease lingered, like a shadow that refused to leave. The fog had thickened again, and as I drove further, I felt that familiar sense of isolation settle in. The roads were deserted, no other cars in sight. The radio was silent. The only sound the soft hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the car's suspension as I navigated the winding road. I thought about the woman. Had I really seen her? Had it been a trick of the fog, my mind playing tricks on me in the isolation of the night? The memory of her face, pale and hollow-eyed, still lingered in my mind, making it difficult to shake off the feeling of dread. Her eyes, they weren't human. No one had eyes like that. I knew I hadn't imagined it. The road twisted ahead, cutting through a narrow passage between the trees. The trees here grew thicker, their branches almost leaning over the road, creating a canopy of dark shadows. I had no idea where I was going anymore. The road signs had long disappeared, and I couldn't remember when I had last passed a familiar landmark. Every turn felt the same, like I was going in circles, trapped in some endless loop of fog and darkness. As I approached another curve in the road, I saw a figure again, standing by the side of the road in the distance. My stomach dropped. This time, it was further ahead, near the edge of a small, overgrown cemetery that I hadn't noticed before. My mind raced, and before I could even process it, my foot slammed down on the brake. The car skidded slightly on the damp road, the tires squealing against the wet pavement as I came to a stop. There she was, standing by the old wrought iron fence of the cemetery, her figure barely visible in the mist. I could see the outline of her white dress again, and the same wide-brimmed hat obscuring her face. She was still and motionless, like a statue carved from the fog itself. I didn't know what to do. My instincts screamed at me to drive away, to turn around and never look back, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The fog had become so thick that I couldn't see beyond a few feet in front of me, and yet she stood there, as if waiting for me to come closer. A chill ran through me, and I suddenly felt a deep, suffocating silence, the kind that fills your ears and presses against your chest. I told myself I was being irrational, that it was just a coincidence, that there was some logical explanation for everything. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone had staged it as part of some strange ritual or a trick to spook passers-by. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't alone. Not really. I started the car again, my foot trembling on the accelerator. The figure remained motionless as I slowly drove past, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. The further I drove, the more the fog seemed to press in on me, almost as if the forest was trying to swallow me whole. And then, just as I reached the end of the cemetery, I saw it. In the corner of the mirror, just before I turned my eyes back to the road, I saw the woman's figure, closer this time, standing right at the edge of the cemetery, her face still obscured by the wide-brimmed hat. But something was different. This time I could see her hand raised, as though beckoning me forward, as if she wanted me to stop and come back. I jerked my head away from the mirror, my hands shaking violently as I gripped the steering wheel. The road ahead was clear, but the weight of her presence seemed to linger in the car, pressing in on me like a heavy fog. The sound of my heart pounding filled my ears as I accelerated, speeding away from the cemetery as quickly as the car would go. My eyes were fixed on the road ahead, but I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, that her gaze was still on me, even from a distance. For the rest of the drive, I didn't dare look back. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, I expected to see her standing in the distance, her figure following me, her hand still raised in that eerie, silent gesture. But the road remained empty. When I finally reached the outskirts of town, I didn't feel relief, but a strange, hollow emptiness. I had made it home, or so I thought. The fog had dissipated, leaving the streets and houses in sharp, cold clarity. But as I pulled into my driveway, I glanced up at the house and froze. There, standing just at the edge of the front yard, was the woman. Her figure was barely visible in the dim light, but I could see her, a shadow in the fog, standing motionless. She was still watching me, waiting. The realization hit me all at once. I had never truly escaped her. She had been following me, and now she was here. I sat frozen in my car, staring at the woman standing motionless in my front yard. My heart thudded in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. I had thought the fog, the shadows, and the isolation of the road had been the worst of it. But now, it felt as though I had never really left the woods. The same unsettling presence, the same eerie, oppressive force, had followed me home. She was still there, standing at the edge of the yard, her face hidden beneath that wide-brimmed hat. Her white gown billowed slightly in the wind, but her body remained unnaturally still, as if she were waiting for something. The way she stood there, unmoving, watching, made every fiber of my being scream for me to run, to get away from her, from whatever she was. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. I reached for my phone, desperate for a distraction, for anything to break the grip of terror tightening around me. But the screen was cracked, the phone dead, and the eerie silence outside made everything feel so much worse. There was no one else. Just me and her. Alone. Suddenly, I remembered something. When I had passed the cemetery earlier, I had seen her standing there, watching from the dark. I didn't know why I hadn't noticed it before, but now it hit me with full force. There was no way she could have followed me so quickly from the cemetery to my house unless she had been there the whole time. My breath caught in my throat. She had been there, watching me, waiting. I started the car again, the engine sputtering in the silence of the night. But as I moved the car forward, I glanced back one more time, my eyes unwillingly drawn to her presence. Her head had tilted slightly, as if acknowledging that I had noticed her. The movement was slow, deliberate, almost too human. It was the first sign of movement I'd seen from her. I should have driven away. I should have, but something held me there. I rolled down the window, my voice shaky. "What do you want from me?" I called out, hoping, praying for some answer, anything to make sense of this madness. But there was only silence. Then, as if in response to my question, the figure began to move. Slowly, she raised her hand. The same strange, slow motion I had seen earlier. Her fingers curled ever so slightly, and that single gesture seemed to pull at something deep inside me, urging me to come closer. I could feel my body responding, like some invisible force was coaxing me forward, pulling me toward her. No. I shook my head, pushing the thought aside. I wasn't going near her. I couldn't. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and sped forward, leaving my driveway behind. I didn't dare look back as I drove away, my heart pounding in my ears. But just as I turned the corner, my headlights flashed on something in the rearview mirror. The woman wasn't standing in my yard anymore. She was standing in the middle of the street, directly in my path. Her form solid and unmoving in the glow of my headlights. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. My hands shook violently on the steering wheel as I stared at her. I didn't know how she had gotten there, but she was standing in the middle of the road now, closer than she had ever been. The white gown billowed in the wind, her face still obscured by the large hat. And yet, even from this distance, I could feel her eyes on me, cold and penetrating. I pressed my foot to the gas, my hands now gripping the wheel so hard, my fingers ached. I swerved to the side of the road, narrowly avoiding her. The tires squealed as I rushed past her, my heart racing. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, she was gone. The road behind me was empty. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I kept driving, the fog growing heavier the further I went, the streets becoming more unfamiliar. The fear in my chest had turned into something worse, something I couldn't explain. The woman was still with me, her presence lingering like a shadow. I tried to push it out of my mind, but it followed me, clung to me like an inescapable weight. The further I drove, the more exhausted I felt, my mind spinning with confusion and dread. I had to be imagining things. It wasn't real. But when I passed a road sign, one I didn't recognize, I realized something was terribly wrong. I wasn't on the road I had come in on. I wasn't even close to my town. I had somehow ended up on a completely different road. I pulled over, my heart thumping in my chest as I glanced around. The fog had become a wall of white, and I couldn't see beyond a few feet. Panic surged through me as I realized I was completely lost, with no idea how to get back. I picked up my phone, praying it had come back to life. But there was still nothing. No signal. No way to call for help. I tried to steady my breath as I looked around, but there was nothing but the endless fog and the road ahead. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, a shadow, faint but unmistakable, moving in the fog. It was her, the woman. She was walking down the road toward me, her figure materializing from the mist like a ghost. She was getting closer, her movements slow and deliberate, her hat tipped low over her face. I couldn't escape her. As she came closer, her hand reached out toward me, her fingers curling slowly, beckoning me forward. My vision blurred, the fog thickening in front of my eyes. The car shook beneath me, as though the very ground was trembling. "Don't come any closer," I whispered, but my voice felt lost in the mist. But she kept coming. I had heard the stories about the old railroad tracks in the Appalachian Mountains, but I never put much stock in them. People love to tell tales about haunted places, especially in a town like ours, where the history runs deep and the land holds secrets that no one seems to understand. The old railroad was abandoned decades ago, with tracks that seemed to stretch endlessly into the woods. I'd driven past it countless times, barely giving it a second glance. But one night, something happened that would change the way I saw the forest and the tracks forever. It was a crisp autumn evening when I decided to take the long, winding road that passed near the railroad. I had no particular reason for choosing that path, other than the fact that I wanted to get away from the noise of the town, away from everything. The air was heavy with the scent of damp leaves, and the trees were already beginning to shed their foliage. The road was dark, narrow, and barely lit by the occasional street lamp, casting long shadows on the ground. As I approached the railroad crossing, I slowed the car, glancing at the old tracks that ran parallel to the road. The sound of the engine hummed softly as I passed the worn wooden posts that marked the abandoned line. There was something oddly unsettling about the place. The tracks seemed to stretch into the distance, disappearing into the forest, and I could almost imagine the echo of a train whistle in the distance. Though I knew the line hadn't been in service for years, I drove a little farther, my headlights cutting through the thickening fog. And then, just as I was about to turn around and head back toward town, I saw something in my rearview mirror. A flicker of light. At first, I thought it was a reflection of my headlights, but as I looked more closely, I realized it wasn't. It was a dim, glowing light, moving steadily along the tracks in the distance. My heart skipped a beat. There was no way a train could be coming. The railroad had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember, but the light kept moving, growing brighter as it approached. My curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I pulled the car to the side of the road and put it in park. I stepped out of the car, my breath visible in the chilly air, and looked down the tracks. The glow was still there, flickering in the distance, like the light from an approaching train. But as I stared into the fog, I realized something was off. There was no sound of a train, no rumbling of wheels, no screeching of metal on rails. Only the eerie, unnatural glow that seemed to pulse in the fog, drawing me in like a magnet. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether I should stay or leave. But the curiosity gnawed at me, and before I knew it, I was walking toward the tracks. The fog wrapped around me, thick and damp, as I stepped off the pavement and onto the dirt that lined the old railroad. The glow grew brighter as I moved closer, and the strange silence pressed against my ears, making everything feel even more surreal. As I neared the crossing, the light began to flicker, like the dying flame of a lantern. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving the darkness in its wake. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring into the empty space where the light had been. There was no sign of any train, no indication of what had just happened. The forest was silent again, and the only sound was the rustle of the wind through the trees. I turned around to head back to my car, the uneasy feeling in my stomach growing with each step. But as I did, I heard something. A faint sound, like the distant whistle of a train carried by the wind. My breath caught in my throat. The whistle grew louder, closer, until I could almost feel the ground tremble beneath me. And then, out of the fog, I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a shape moving through the mist. But as it drew closer, I could make out the outline of a train, an old, rusted steam engine, its massive wheels turning slowly on the tracks. The light from the train's lanterns flickered in the fog, casting long shadows that danced across the ground. The sound of the whistle was deafening now, but there was something wrong with it. It didn't sound like a real train whistle. It sounded hollow, distant, as though it were being pulled from the air itself. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. This couldn't be real. The tracks were abandoned. There was no way a train could be here. But as the figure of the train drew closer, the fog seemed to part around it, and I could see the outline of the conductor standing at the front of the engine. He was tall, thin, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. I took a step back, my mind racing. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted to the ground, my body paralyzed by fear. The train continued to roll toward me, the wheels clanking against the tracks with an eerie rhythm. But as it neared, something strange happened. The train didn't slow down. It didn't stop. It kept coming, as if it didn't see me, as if I were nothing more than a shadow in its path. The whistle grew deafening, and the train was upon me. The train was almost upon me, the sound of its wheels grinding on the old tracks vibrating through my chest. I should have run. I should have turned and sprinted back to my car, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, rooted to the spot, my body refusing to obey my frantic thoughts. The train's light flooded the dark woods, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to stretch toward me, as if the darkness itself was reaching out to pull me in. I could feel the cold air from the train's passing. It wasn't the cold of a winter night. No, this was something worse. It was an unnatural chill, a sensation that made my skin crawl, as if the air itself had turned to ice. The sound of the train's whistle echoed around me, and I could feel the ground tremble beneath my feet as the massive engine drew nearer. I wanted to scream, to run, but the eerie silence that had enveloped the forest after the train's whistle seemed to swallow my voice, leaving only the deafening sound of the train and my own erratic breathing. The light from the train cast a strange glow over the tracks, illuminating the rusted, decaying metal of the rails. The train's massive wheels rolled forward, but it didn't make a sound beyond the whistle and the clanking of the metal. It was as if it were moving in another dimension, where reality itself had been distorted. The fog swirled around it, but the train seemed to glide through it as if unaffected by the world around it. I watched in a daze as the train came closer, its lanterns flickering like dying stars in the dark. And then, as it reached the point where I stood, something happened that made my heart stop completely. The train didn't pass me. Instead, it slowed, the wheels grinding against the track with an eerie screech. The sound was unnatural, almost metallic, as if the very bones of the train were being scraped across the rails. And then, just as suddenly as it had slowed, the train stopped altogether, right in front of me. For a moment, everything was still. The fog hung thick in the air, and the train's lights cast eerie shadows across the forest. I could see the conductor now, standing at the front of the engine, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. His figure was tall, shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but his face was unmistakably hidden from view. His posture was rigid, as if he were waiting for something, or someone. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The air seemed to constrict around me, pushing the very life out of my lungs. But still, I couldn't move. My feet remained stuck to the ground, my eyes locked on the train, unwilling to look away. And then, to my horror, the figure of the conductor stepped down from the engine, his long coat billowing behind him as he moved. He didn't walk like a normal person. His movements were slow and deliberate, almost mechanical, as if his body were no longer human. His eyes were hidden in the shadows of his hat, but I could feel his gaze on me, piercing through the fog. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. My words felt hollow, lost in the fog that seemed to consume the very sound. The conductor didn't answer. He simply moved toward me, his steps echoing on the tracks. My breath came in ragged gasps. I didn't know what to do. Should I run? Should I call for help? But I knew no one would hear me. This place, this train, wasn't part of the world I knew. It was something else, something beyond my understanding. As he got closer, the train's whistle blew again, a long, mournful sound that seemed to reverberate in the air. The conductor stopped a few feet from me, his form casting a shadow that stretched unnaturally long across the tracks. And then, in a voice that was both distant and close at the same time, he spoke. "Are you coming with me?" His voice was low, almost a growl, and the words seemed to echo in my head long after he had spoken. They didn't make sense. Why would I go with him? Why would anyone? But before I could answer, or even think, he stepped closer. My pulse raced as his hand reached out toward me, his fingers cold and lifeless. His touch was like ice, sending a shock of freezing cold through my skin as his fingers brushed against my arm. "No," I gasped, pulling away. I finally found my voice. "I'm not going with you," but the conductor didn't seem to hear me. His hand closed around my wrist with a grip that felt like steel. I tried to pull away, but it was useless. He was too strong, his hand unyielding, as if his very presence had locked me in place. "Please," I whispered, terror flooding my veins. "Please let me go." For a moment, the conductor just stood there, his head tilted slightly, as if considering my words. Then, slowly, he nodded. He didn't say a word. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the train, his steps slow and deliberate. His figure became a shadow in the fog once again, and I could hear the faint clanking of the train's wheels as it began to move forward. The train didn't accelerate, though. It seemed to glide, moving without sound, as if it were part of the fog itself. And as it passed me, I saw something. Something that made my blood run cold. The faces in the windows. They were blurred at first, but as the train moved closer, I saw them clearly. Faces, pale and lifeless, staring out from the windows. There were no expressions on their faces. No fear, no anger, just blank, hollow stares that seemed to pierce through me. And in the fleeting moments I had before the train moved beyond me, I realized something that made my stomach twist. The people inside the train weren't alive. They couldn't be. They were the passengers, but they were dead. The train moved slowly through the fog, its lanterns flickering dimly as it glided past me. The faces in the windows seemed to blur, as if they were fading into the mist. But I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still watching me. Watching. Waiting. My body was trembling, my legs unsteady as I tried to make sense of what I was witnessing. The train's presence, the cold touch of the conductor's hand, the faces inside. It was all too much. There had to be some explanation. There had to be a rational reason for this, something that could make sense of the impossible. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was no explanation. What I had seen, what I was feeling, was beyond any earthly understanding. As the train passed by, the conductor stopped at the edge of the tracks. He didn't turn to look back at me. His face, hidden in shadow beneath his wide-brimmed hat, was just out of view. But I knew he was there, waiting for me to make my choice. The train began to pick up speed, but it wasn't like any train I'd ever seen. It didn't make the usual sounds of clattering wheels or the hiss of steam. No, this train moved through the mist, like something that didn't belong in this world, something that existed outside of time and space. And yet, it was there. It was real. Or was it? "Are you coming with me?" The conductor's voice echoed again, the words vibrating in my chest, as if they were being spoken not through the air, but through my very soul. His voice was calm, almost inviting, but there was an underlying menace in it that sent chills through me. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. I wanted to say no. I wanted to run, to escape, to get back to my car and leave this place behind. But the strange pull of the train, of the conductor, seemed to draw me in, like an invisible force that was too strong to resist. The whispers began again, faint at first, but then growing louder, more insistent. They weren't words anymore. They were a command, a calling that I couldn't ignore. For a moment, I was frozen, standing at the edge of the tracks, my feet unable to move. The train was almost out of sight now, the sound of its whistle growing distant. But the pull was still there. It was like the train was a part of me now, a force I couldn't escape, a decision I couldn't undo. I took a step forward, another. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet, and I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I had no idea why I was doing this, why I was walking toward the train, but I couldn't stop myself. The conductor's figure loomed in the distance, barely visible in the fading fog, his head tilted as if waiting for me to catch up. I walked faster, my breath ragged, the air thick with mist. The trees, the fog, the earth beneath my feet. They all seemed to blur together, becoming part of the same strange, dreamlike world that the train inhabited. As I reached the edge of the tracks, I heard the sound of the train's wheels grinding to a halt, the screeching of metal against metal making my ears ring. The train was there, waiting for me. I could feel the weight of its presence, as if it were not just a machine, but something alive, something ancient. The conductor stood at the front of the engine, his head still lowered beneath his hat, but his posture had changed. It was as if he were beckoning me to step aboard, inviting me into a world I couldn't understand. I couldn't look away. I was drawn to it, to the dark interior of the train, to the strange, dead faces in the windows that now seemed to watch me, their hollow eyes reflecting the faint glow of the lanterns. I took one final step. My foot landed on the first metal step of the train, and I felt a jolt shoot through my body, like a shock of electricity. The door to the train creaked open, and I stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit only by the soft glow of lanterns that hung from the ceiling. The walls were covered in dust and grime, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew. The seats were old and cracked, the wood warped from years of neglect. But it wasn't the condition of the train that unsettled me. It was the silence of the passengers. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They just sat there, staring blankly ahead, their eyes unfocused, lost in the void. I moved deeper into the train, my steps slow and hesitant. I could feel the eyes of the passengers on me, even though they didn't acknowledge my presence. The fog pressed against the windows, but inside the train, it felt like a different world altogether, like a place frozen in time, where nothing moved, where nothing changed. As I walked down the aisle, I saw the conductor standing at the far end of the car. He didn't move, didn't speak, but I knew he was aware of my presence. He was waiting for me to take my seat, to join the others, to become one of them. I stood there, at the threshold of the next car, staring at the empty seats. And then I realized something. I wasn't the only one on this train. The passengers, those hollow-eyed figures, had been here for far longer than I could imagine. They weren't just travelers. They were trapped, lost in time, bound to the train for eternity. They were the ones who had never escaped, who had never left, and now it was my turn. The train lurched forward again, slowly at first, but picking up speed. The screeching of the wheels filled my ears, drowning out everything else. And as I looked around, I realized that I had joined them. I had become part of this cursed journey, trapped on the nowhere railroad, and there was no turning back. I've lived in the Appalachian foothills all my life, surrounded by the towering trees, the mist, and the ancient, quiet beauty of the mountains. The locals know the stories, the old legends that whisper through the leaves. But until that night, I had never truly believed them. I had always thought they were just stories, harmless superstitions meant to warn outsiders about the dangers of the forest. But that was before I went into the heart of the forest, deep where the shadows don't reach. It started as a simple weekend trip with a few friends. We'd planned to hike a well-known trail through the woods, a familiar route, one we had all taken several times before. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the moon climbed higher, something changed. Something that none of us could explain, but all of us could feel. We had started early that morning, laughing and talking as we trekked through the forest. It was peaceful, the air crisp and clean, the trees towering above us, their leaves rustling softly in the wind. We stopped at a small creek to rest, the gentle sound of the water soothing our nerves. But as the day wore on and the light began to fade, a strange unease settled over the group. I was the first to notice it. The trees around us, once welcoming, now seemed to loom closer, their twisted branches stretching toward the sky like bony fingers. The forest felt heavier, darker, as if something was watching us. "Hey, is it just me, or are the shadows wrong?" I asked, turning to my friends. I was trying to joke, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Sarah, walking ahead, looked back with a frown. "What do you mean, wrong?" I gestured to the trees around us. The shadows cast by the trees on the ground were oddly sharp, too defined, stretching unnaturally long. It wasn't like the usual play of light and dark we'd seen on our previous hikes. These shadows were almost too perfect, too still. "Look at the shadows on the ground," I said. "They're too sharp. The light doesn't match the shadows." We all stopped and looked around. The forest seemed strangely still, the usual rustling of leaves or the chirp of crickets absent. It was unnerving. The shadows clung to the trees, but they didn't move. They stayed rigid, like they were frozen in time. "I don't like this," Jake muttered, his voice uneasy. "Let's head back. We've gone off the trail too far." But before we could make our decision, something caught my eye. A faint glow flickered through the trees, far off in the distance. It wasn't the usual glimmer of sunlight reflecting off leaves. This was different, unnatural, almost spectral. "What's that?" I whispered. Sarah and Jake turned to look in the direction I was pointing. The glow was faint at first, but it grew stronger, illuminating the space between the trees like a lantern floating in midair. "Is that a campfire?" Sarah asked, her voice skeptical. I shook my head. "No. It's too far in the woods. It's not on the trail." Against our better judgment, we decided to investigate. We didn't know why we felt drawn to the light, but something about it was magnetic, like it was calling to us. As we moved toward the glow, the forest grew even darker. The shadows stretched longer, and the air grew unnervingly still. It was as if the forest had swallowed the sound of our footsteps, leaving us in a vacuum of silence. With each step we took, the shadows seemed to grow longer and closer, the trees bending in on us like they were pressing us into the earth. We finally reached the edge of a clearing, and there it was. The light, hovering just above the ground, casting a faint glow over the area. It wasn't from a fire, though. The light seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, and there was no source, just a soft, glowing sphere of light that hung in the air. "This isn't right," Jake said, his voice trembling. He took a step back, but his eyes were locked on the light. I felt it too. A growing sense of dread, like something was about to happen. The longer we stared at the light, the more everything else around us seemed to fade away. The forest, the trees, the air, it all became irrelevant. All that mattered was that light, and the strange pull it had on us. Suddenly the light flickered, and for a split second, I saw something. A shape, standing just beyond the light. It was tall, thin, and completely black, its outline sharply defined against the glowing sphere. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there watching us. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, the shape was gone. The light was gone. The forest was silent again. "What the hell was that?" Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with fear. She was shaking, her breath coming in shallow bursts. We all stood frozen, unsure of what we had just seen. Jake stepped back slowly. "We need to go. Now." We didn't need any more convincing. We turned around, trying to make our way back to the trail, but the woods seemed different now. The shadows, once so still, had begun to move. They twisted and shifted in unnatural ways, reaching for us, following our every step. "I don't remember this part of the trail," Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. She looked around, her eyes darting from tree to tree as if expecting something to jump out at us. "Just keep walking," I urged, trying to keep my voice steady. I couldn't explain it, but I knew that the longer we stayed in this place, the worse it would get. The path ahead seemed to stretch on forever, each step taking us deeper into the forest. And with each step, the shadows seemed to close in tighter. The trees around us grew taller, their branches blocking out the sky, the air growing thick and heavy, as if we were being swallowed whole. And then we heard it, a low, guttural sound, like something moving through the underbrush. It wasn't an animal, and it wasn't the wind. It was something else, something that didn't belong in this world. We froze, all of us, hearts pounding, eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" Jake whispered. I nodded, my throat dry. "We need to get out of here. Now." But as we turned to run, the path behind us was gone. The trees had closed in, forming an impenetrable wall of shadows. We were trapped. Panic set in. The air around us felt thick, suffocating, and the shadows seemed to stretch impossibly long, closing in from every direction. We were surrounded, but there was no way out. The path we had followed just moments before had vanished, swallowed whole by the looming trees. The forest, once familiar, now seemed like an alien world, one that didn't want us there. "Where did the trail go?" Sarah gasped, her voice high with fear. She reached for my arm, but I shook her off. my eyes scanning the dark forest around us. "I don't know," I said, my voice strained. "Just stay close. We'll find a way out." But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. There was no way out. The forest was alive, and we were caught in its grip. The trees were massive now, towering above us, their gnarled branches twisting and curling like dark fingers, reaching out to trap us. The ground beneath our feet was uneven, and the earth itself seemed to pulse with a strange energy. With each step, I could feel the ground shift, as if it were trying to suck us in, to keep us there. The eerie silence that had settled over the forest was oppressive. There was no rustling of leaves, no chirping of crickets. It was as if all life had been drained from the woods. The only sound was the pounding of our own hearts, the quick, shallow breaths we all took in sync. The air felt cold now, unnaturally so, and a chill ran down my spine as the wind picked up, swirling through the trees with an almost malevolent force. I'm not going any further," Jake said, his voice breaking through the silence. He looked pale, his eyes wide with panic. "This isn't right. We need to leave. Now." He turned to run, but I grabbed his arm before he could take a step. "Wait, Jake, we can't just..." But the words died in my throat. I had no idea where to go. The forest was like a maze, and no matter which way we turned, the trees seemed to close in tighter. We were trapped, and the longer we stood there, the more the shadows pressed in on us. "I'll be damned if I'm staying here," Jake muttered, pulling his arm away from my grip. "I'm getting out of here." He didn't look back. He turned and started running, his footsteps heavy and quick against the earth. But it didn't take long for us to realize something that made our blood run cold. Jake wasn't going anywhere. He stopped dead in his tracks after only a few paces. At first I thought he had tripped, but then I saw it. The trees in front of him were shifting. The branches were moving, slowly, deliberately, as if they were closing off his path. He was caught. The trees had formed a barrier in front of him, and the path behind him had disappeared. "Jake, what the hell?" I shouted, my voice trembling. "Come back!" But he didn't answer. His body was rigid, his face blank, like he wasn't hearing me at all. I could see his eyes, wide with terror, locked on the space ahead of him, but he didn't move. He couldn't move. "Jake!" I screamed again, but it was no use. He wasn't there anymore. Not really. A cold wind swept through the trees, and the shadows around us seemed to deepen. I turned to Sarah, my heart pounding in my chest. "We need to help him." But as I looked at Sarah, I saw her face had gone ashen, her eyes wide with fear. She wasn't looking at Jake. She was staring at something behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know what it was. The forest had come alive. I could feel it. Something in the air, something watching us, something hungry. The trees were no longer just trees. They were twisted, monstrous, their trunks warping and bending unnaturally. The bark seemed to ripple like liquid, and the branches stretched down, reaching toward us like claws, scratching at the air. "Run!" Sarah screamed, grabbing my arm and pulling me back. Her grip was strong, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the movement behind me. The trees were alive. With one quick motion, the shadowed limbs reached forward, seizing Jake's body. The last thing I saw was his face, his wide, terrified eyes, before the shadows pulled him into the forest, his body vanishing in an instant, swallowed whole by the dark. "No!" I screamed, my legs moving before my mind could catch up. I ran, pulling Sarah with me, but the forest wasn't letting us go. The trees seemed to shift with every step we took, cutting us off at every turn. The ground beneath our feet trembled, as if the earth itself was alive, shifting, twisting, trying to trap us in its grasp. We couldn't get out. No matter which way we turned, the forest closed in around us. The shadows were everywhere now, reaching for us, grasping at our arms and legs. The air was thick with a stench I couldn't place, like decay, like rot. The once familiar woods had turned into a nightmare, "Where are we?" Sarah cried, her voice choked with fear. She was looking at me now, her face pale, tears streaking down her cheeks. "What is happening?" I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what was happening. The only thing I knew was that we couldn't stop running. We couldn't stop moving, but the forest wasn't letting us leave. As we ran, the whispers began. Faint at first, like the wind carrying distant voices, but then they grew louder, clearer. Words I couldn't understand. Words that seemed to press into my mind, drowning out my thoughts. They were all around us, no, inside us, filling my head with an overwhelming sense of dread. The forest was alive, and it wanted us to stay. Forever. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A clearing. A place where the trees didn't reach out toward us. A place where the shadows didn't stretch and writhe. It was a safe haven. We ran toward it, but the closer we got, the harder it became to breathe. The air felt thick, like we were swimming through it. The forest was pushing back, trying to keep us in its grip. We reached the edge of the clearing, but as I stepped into it, I stopped dead in my tracks. The trees had stopped moving, the shadows had disappeared, but there was something in the center of the clearing, something that had been waiting for us. The figure in the center of the clearing was tall, impossibly tall, its form blurred and shifting, as if it were made of smoke or shadows. Its presence was overwhelming, pressing down on me like a heavy weight. The air around us grew colder, and the whispers in my mind grew louder, almost deafening. Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip tight and desperate. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing noise in my head. I didn't know what it was, but I felt the answer in the pit of my stomach. It was the forest, the trees. Whatever force had been pulling us deeper into this nightmare had taken shape, and now it was here, standing before us. The figure didn't move, but I could feel it watching us, its presence all-encompassing. Like the forest itself had gathered into one terrifying shape. I wanted to turn and run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. It was as if the ground itself had rooted me to the spot. Suddenly, the figure stepped forward. Or at least, I thought it did. The movement was so slow, so deliberate, that it seemed to blur and stretch as though time itself was bending around it. My breath caught in my throat, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward me, like they were reaching for my soul. "Run!" I finally screamed, my legs moving without thinking. I grabbed Sarah's hand and yanked her along, but we didn't get far. The forest was closing in around us. The trees seemed to bend toward us, their branches twisting and curling like monstrous fingers, cutting off our path. The figure was still there, its shape becoming clearer, but now it seemed to be multiplying, its form splintering into several other indistinct shadows. The whispers in my mind grew louder, and the air was thick with the scent of decay, of something long dead, something that had never left this place. I didn't know where to run. The trees had become a maze, twisting in on themselves, creating dead ends and narrowing paths that led us nowhere. The shadows stretched further, and I could feel them tugging at my thoughts, pulling at my mind, until I could barely think straight. The voices in my head became incoherent, a mass of words and images I couldn't make sense of. I looked at Sarah, but she was staring ahead, her face blank, her eyes glazed over. The same thing had happened to Jake. The forest had taken him, just like it was taking her now. "No!" I shouted, shaking her, but she didn't respond. Her body was still, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The figure in the clearing shifted, its shape growing clearer still. It was human, or at least it looked human, but its features were stretched and distorted, like something that had been warped by time, by the land itself. Its eyes were empty black voids, and as it stepped forward, the ground beneath it seemed to crack open, as if the earth itself couldn't contain its presence. "Join us," a voice echoed through the trees, the sound reverberating in my chest. It wasn't a voice. It was more like a collective hum, like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. "Become one with the forest. Stay here. Forever. I shook my head, my chest heaving with panic. No, I won't! I won't stay here! But the figure didn't move. Instead, it raised one long, skeletal arm and pointed directly at me. I could feel the weight of its gaze pressing against me, suffocating me, as if its very being was trying to break through my mind. And then, I heard it. A sound, distant at first, but growing louder. A train whistle. It echoed through the trees, piercing the silence. The ground beneath me trembled, and I felt something cold slide over my skin. The whistle grew louder, closer. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real, but it was. The figure slowly began to dissolve, its shape flickering in and out of existence. The train whistle echoed again, and I could feel the presence of the forest shifting. The trees seemed to sway in time with the sound, like they were alive, like they were dancing to the same rhythm. And then, I saw it. Just at the edge of the clearing, the train appeared. It wasn't a regular train. It wasn't made of metal and steel. It was something else, something ancient, something twisted. The wheels were nothing but shadows, the windows empty and dark. The light from its lanterns flickered, casting sickly shadows on the ground. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing. It was the forest. It was part of it. The train was part of this place, a manifestation of the land itself, pulling me into its depths, dragging me away from everything I had known. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The whispers were louder now, drowning out my thoughts, growing more insistent. Come, ride with us. The train's whistle sounded again, the voice of the conductor filling my mind. But as the train stopped in front of me, I saw the passengers, the same hollow-eyed figures I had seen before. Their faces were blank, their eyes empty, and I knew without a doubt that they were like the figures in the forest. Trapped, lost, bound to this cursed place forever. I stepped forward, my legs moving of their own accord, and as I did, I felt the grip of the forest tighten around me. The trees whispered, the wind howled, and the shadows stretched toward me, pulling me in. The train's door opened slowly, and I knew that once I stepped inside, I would never leave. The whispers grew louder, and the train beckoned me forward, its cold, empty interior waiting for me. I looked back at Sarah. She was gone. Her body had disappeared into the mist, lost to the shadows. And as I stepped toward the train, I realized I wasn't just walking into the train. I was walking into the forest itself, into the heart of it, where the lost souls waited, where the shadows never ended. And as I boarded the train, I felt the forest close in behind me, the door shutting with a deafening clang. The train's wheels began to turn again, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled my soul, that this was my final journey. There was no going back.